The question is that this House has considered the situation in Ukraine. I call the Shadow Minister, Andrew Rosendale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are at a crucial juncture in this conflict, and the stakes could not be higher. It has been nearly 4 years since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, a period of time nearly that of the duration of the First World War, with many of those same horrors that our soldiers witnessed in those days. Trench warfare, a war of attrition, being witnessed today by a generation of young Ukrainians and Russians who are being decimated in their hundreds of thousands. We have also tragically seen the horrific mass deportation of 20,000 Ukrainian children. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is nothing short of a war crime. Make no mistake, on the line is sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. The freedom and democracy enjoyed by its people, and also the entire security architecture of the West is at stake. The threat is especially acute in the eastern flank for countries like Moldova and in the Black Sea, but this reaches far beyond the region. It is, Madam Deputy Speaker, about the security of all of us. European countries are already having to protect their borders from malign Russian activity. We have had to do so for years and will continue to do so. But 2025, I felt, looked like a real turning point. Just look at what has been happening in Poland. Whether that's Russian drones, incursions or railway sabotage, Romania and Estonia have both had their airspace outrageously violated by Russia, and the Royal Navy has had to be activated to intercept Russian ships, including Yantar, and we all know the real purpose of that ship. Russia is already waging a sophisticated, hybrid and subconventional campaign against us. The reality is that we must be prepared for sustained tension with Russia for many years to come. But the outcome of the war in Ukraine is central to whether that threat is checked or emboldened. And this extends beyond that of just Russia. The fact that Putin is now reliant on North Korean personnel and ammunition should shame him, but it should also warn us. The war has become a testing ground for an authoritarian axis that will not stop at Ukraine if it is allowed to succeed. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, all of us want to see this war end. It is unjust, unprovoked, and entirely of Putin's making. It is therefore of no surprise that Putin appears completely insincere about wanting to reach a genuine ceasefire. We understand that initiatives to end this war, led by the United States of America, are progressing, at least on the Ukrainian side, and it would be helpful to hear from the Minister in the wind-up his latest assessment of those talks and their direction of travel. It is also important to recognise where responsibility lies. Time and again, Ukraine has showed a willingness to engage in discussions aimed at ending the conflict. Russia, by contrast, has repeatedly demonstrated a lack of seriousness and sincerity. If ceasefire proposals are rejected or negotiations undermined, the obstacle to peace lies not in Kyiv nor among Ukraine's friend, but, Madam Deputy Speaker, firmly in Moscow. One principle must remain non-negotiable, that the Ukrainian people must be sovereign in their own land. They have paid in blood to defend themselves and their homeland, and decisions about their future, their borders and their security arrangements must be made by Ukraine and Ukraine alone. No peace imposed from outside will endure, and no settlement that ignores the will of the Ukrainian people can be sustainable. And as we have done throughout history, Britain must continue to show international leadership in defending that principle. And so I would welcome an update from the Minister on what the UK is doing diplomatically to that end. What is crucial is that we achieve a just and lasting peace. Putin cannot emerge strengthened from a potential settlement. We cannot give in to him because the lesson of the last 20 years is that he always comes back for more, with a persistent desire to exert control over neighbouring states and to challenge the post-Cold War settlement in Europe. And it is clear that he has, in the KGB playbook, outright now with the statecraft he is using, Putin has not abandoned his territorial ambitions. He wants to subjugate Ukraine, lock, stock and barrel. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, a lasting peace is not about conceding to aggression. Territorial concessions would mean rewarding Putin's barbaric attacks on the Ukrainian people. Britain must lead the way again on sanctions and keep tightening the screws on Putin's war machine. Moscow should be denied safe harbours for its tankers and profits, and the EU should step up and ban Russian oil and gas sooner than it currently plans to do in 2027. So, can the Minister confirm whether he has been pressing his EU counterparts in the European Union and European capitals to do exactly that? The Atlantic Alliance must lead a new pincer movement to further constrain Russia's energy revenues and stop Putin getting his hands on military equipment. The issue with Russian oil persists. Countries are allowing the purchase and whitewashing of Russian oil on their watch. We know the businesses, refineries and individuals who are profiting from Russian energy exports. So, does the government plan to take further action against those enablers? On sovereign Russian assets, it is clear we need to go a lot further. We welcome the £2.26 billion loan made by the UK to Ukraine off the back of the profits from immobilised Russian sovereign assets. But the government cannot view this as the end of the road. Instead, ministers need to be working around the clock, including with the City of London and our allies, to find innovative and workable legal solutions that allow us to go even further and drive other G7 and European states to do the same. So, what is the current status of talks with the EU, the United States and the G7 partners? And specifically, what recent discussions has the Minister had with his Belgian counterpart? What is the UK doing to help move things along? And does the Minister agree that when those sanctioned assets are mobilised, they should not be just for the reconstruction of Ukraine, but also to support the Ukrainian people as fast as possible? And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, for all the talk of negotiations, we must not lose sight of the fact that we and our allies combined GDP colossally outweighs Russia's, and that we need to be leveraging this in every right way. We need to ramp up our defence industrial base now for the long term, because we know that Russia, sustaining its war economy, will come at an enormous price to them, whilst it is already reeling from sanctions with interest rates at high levels, not seen in decades, and with welfare payments having to be slashed in Russia. Last week we learned that the government's vision for British troops on the ground in Ukraine should happen if a peace agreement is agreed. So this deployment of British troops is, I believe, one of the most serious decisions a government and a parliament could ever take. So there are a number of vital details that I believe we need to understand about what exactly the government plans are for any future deployment. These include the rules of engagement, troop numbers, how rotations could work, the composition of the force, whether any British soldiers will be actively involved in policing and patrolling of any border or demilitarised zone, and what air and naval assets would be provided as part of any multinational force for Ukraine. The British people will expect answers to these vital questions before we consider sending our boys out to a conflict zone, potentially risking the lives of courageous British servicemen and women. The government must also confirm the contributions of other countries and the nature of any security guarantees, particularly with regard to the United States and indeed Germany. We also need ministers to confirm whether soldiers operating in Ukraine will be subject to the European Convention on Human Rights during any deployment. I would also be grateful if the Minister could clarify which government budget such operation will be funded from, and does he agree that this underscores the imperative of spending 3% of GDP on defence by the end of this Parliament? Her Majesty's opposition have called for this, and I hope the government will do the same. Kicking the can into the next decade with no roadmap is simply not going to cut it in the world we currently live in. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must do everything in our power to deter another invasion of this kind to any other country. And in principle, Britain must be involved in any and every effort to provide deterrence against such aggression in the future. But two things are also critical in the immediate term. First, that Ukraine continues to receive the military aid it needs to fight back against Russia's increasingly savage war, and that Putin's ability to wage this war is further undermined, for example, through biting new sanctions. Second, that any initiatives to secure an end to the conflict deliver peace on the terms of the Ukrainian people and with the involvement of Ukraine. We cannot allow Putin to be strengthened. And so can the Minister also provide an update on how the UK is ensuring Ukraine is able to meet the increasingly savage tactics being used by Russia? And so to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the early days of the war, the previous Conservative government played a pivotal role in coming to the aid of the Ukrainian people. Just as Margaret Thatcher stood up to the threat of Soviet domination in Eastern Europe and fought for their freedom and their democracy, ultimately leading to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union, my party led at the outset of this invasion and continues to stand with the Ukrainian people. As usual, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was British leadership that set the direction of travel for many European countries. It was the British people who provided approximately £12 billion in overall support, including military and humanitarian aid. And with our allies, it was Britain that imposed the largest and most severe set of sanctions that Russia had ever seen to cripple Putin's war machine. It was indeed Britain that hosted the Ukraine Recovery Conference in 2023, raising billions for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. And it was Britain that established Operation Interflux, which has now trained over 50,000 Ukrainian recruits on British soil since the illegal invasion of 2022. When freedom is threatened, Britain stands resolute. Today, we feel as passionately as we did 4 years ago about defending and restoring the freedom that the Ukrainian people earned back in 1991. Long has Britain stood for the cause of freedom, and long may that continue.